Florida's first coast. A beautiful place to live. We're raising our kids, we're going to work, we're building our lives here. But there is one thing we can't control, and it's out of our hands. The one threat that comes every single year. Hurricane season. And the only thing we can do is prepare for it.
This is a First Coast News special presentation from the First Coast's most accurate weather team, certified by WeatheRate. Hurricane Ready 2022, 40 years of forecasting. Sponsored by AC Designs, Heating and Air Conditioning, your home comfort experts. Rhino Shield, engineered to outlast paint. And by Universal Roof and Contracting. Experience the difference.
I'm Rautenkranz. You know, my family and I are lucky enough to call this place home. And what's really cool is that I get to work with people that I call family too. Tim Deegan is one of those special people. You know, he's been around for quite some time. And for the next hour, I get to sit down with him and pick his brain. 40 years of forecasting right here along the First Coast. So here we are.
Here we are.
Hurricane season 2020.
2022. Wow.
Our 7th season together.
And yet, it really doesn't tell your story. Because to me, the fact that you experienced Matthew and then Irma, I mean, seriously, when we take a look back briefly at our history, you have 20 years of hurricane experience. Seriously, just from Matthew and Irma.
So that would mean you have about 80 because you're heading into your 41st season.
Wow. Yeah, I better go take a nap.
But I mean, you've been here through a whole lot, you know, just with your experience. But obviously the First Coast has been through a whole lot more before that as well.
There is, and I think some people are kind of surprised about that come elsewhere, and they hear that we're not hit by hurricanes. And of course, we are. We are in a much better place than other areas of Florida, but we certainly deal with them. And of course, Dora is the marker, 1964. What I've learned is, because of course we call the First Coast Brunswick all the way down to Flagler, that I'd like to go back about 130 years. So the 1880s, 1890s, Brunswick, 2 major hurricanes, 2 Cat 3s. One hits Brunswick and goes to Savannah. One's hit Brunswick and goes to Patterson. Goes right by Jacksonville, but still, that's our family,
right.
You know, Southeast Georgia, Northeast Florida. And then we get to the 20s, and one of the classic, I think, type of hurricanes where South Florida gets hit worse, 1926, hits Jupiter's a Category 2, hits us, but barely as a 1. And then all kind of hurricanes over South Florida and the Panhandle, but then we go all the way to the 40s. 3 hurricanes, 44, 49, 50, all either hit South Florida or Southwest Florida first, hit us as a Category 1, but again, not as strong. Then we go all the way to 1960, Donna, which was, I think, the longest landfalling hurricane in East Coast history. We get hit, but probably less significantly than anybody else on the East Coast.
Right.
And then although 64, which we're going to focus on Dora, because it's our only direct hit, but just before Dora, we had Cleo, hit South Florida in a big way, and then comes Dora, and then, of course, Dora's our big one.
If you were to be in an elevator with someone, what would be like your elevator speech of Jacksonville's hurricane history?
We are impacted by hurricanes as much as any other person in Florida or southeastern Georgia. The good news for us is very seldom do we get the eye. So we have to watch it, but very often we're caring more about others.
I think one thing that shocked me when I moved to Jacksonville, you know, more than 6 years ago, is that people always told me, well, I moved to Jacksonville from New Orleans or from the Carolinas because Jacksonville doesn't get hurricanes. And I've got to say, after the, you know, going into my 7th year now and going into your 41st year, it kind of irks me a little bit because we do get hurricanes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess, you know, if you're having a trivia contest and say, well, who gets the least amount of hurricanes, and you're simply talking about landfall, I guess that works. But otherwise, we're right there. We could, of course, talk forever why that is that we get less direct hits. But once again, if I'm in an elevator with somebody, what I say is it literally is geography. We're at 30 degrees north. So at 30 degrees north, most hurricanes by that point, if they're at 30 degrees, they're headed from south to north, which means for us at the very least, it's paralleling the coastline. And because on the East Coast, we're as far to the west as Pittsburgh, it's more likely that once the hurricane makes the turn, it's going to pass just off to our east. But then what happens when they swing back west like Dora did?
I was going to say, the exception being Dora, who just kind of took that straight line and just kept on going, barreled right into Jacksonville. So some people might say, why did that happen with Dora and why hasn't that happened since, maybe?
And I would say when people see us covering a hurricane, like let's say between Puerto Rico and south of Bermuda, and most forecasts indicate it's going to make the turn 1,000 miles east of us. And folks say, why are y'all spending so much time with it? Well, although yes, computer models are so much better, but we do have the memory of the Doras that looks like they're making the turn and then they come back west, which is especially why, as you know, with the Matthews, when we think it's going to pass 100 miles, 50 miles, if we're off by 50 or 100 miles, especially because we're trying to make decisions 3 to 5 days before it's here, that's nothing.
Right. Miles matter, and I mean like 5 to 10 miles can matter, especially in Matthew's case when it's just about 30 miles off the coast. I mean, that's a difference of hurricane force winds versus tropical storm force winds.
Miles matter. You nail it. I was looking back at Matthew and the official summary of Matthew, and it showed how, and even if you're new to the area, I think people can picture the Florida coast and how the Cape Canaveral just barely sticks out. Well, that allowed them, if you want to put it that way, to just catch the northwest eye wall, and they got gusts to 125 miles per hour. Whereas especially up here in northeast Florida, we sort of sit in, and so even if a hurricane is moving due north, in many ways, now we're farther west of it than folks like the Cape. But miles matter in such a huge way.
And so there is more than just Dora and Matthew. Obviously, there's a lot of in between too. But as far as not just coastal impacts, but there have been a lot of inland impacts as well with our area in particular.
Well, I think we can learn from every single hurricane or even tropical storm. I think back to Elena, 1985. For those who weren't around then, it was primarily a Gulf Coast hurricane. Now, for people in Tampa and the Panhandle, they remember it because it was around Labor Day. It was wobbling. There were no steering currents. The Panhandle was initially evacuated. Then it looked like it was going to Tampa. They were evacuated. Then it finally did go back to the Panhandle. Meanwhile, the whole time it's in the Gulf, we're being pounded with rain in Jacksonville, and actually out to our Live Oak in Lake City, they had some flooding. So to me, that was a great lesson of the big concern was Gulf Coast, and yet we had flooding way inland around the Suwannee County area.
We'll take Irma, for example. It made landfall in southwest Florida, and we saw some of the biggest. I mean, the headlines were in Jacksonville with record flooding and historic flooding, and you saw those, really captivating headlines. And so a lot of people, again, wondered why it was so bad afterwards.
Right, because 50 years from now, people will say, Irma had made a direct hit in San Marco or Marco Island as a Cat 4, so that wasn't a Jacksonville big deal. And yet, it was the biggest deal we've had since Dora. Now, I do think what folks who are new to the area need to remember is that the St. Johns River, in many ways, as you know, is like a long inlet. In other words, the drop is so slow, it really is as much impacted by tidal as it is by rain. Therefore, I have told people the St. Johns River is one of the few rivers where unless there's a biblical rain event, it's not going to flood because of rain.
Right.
But because it can fill up like an inlet, if you have the combination of the two, Katie barred the door, and that's what happened. We had, I was looking at a summary just recently, and so the official numbers for history are that northeast Florida had basically a 2 to 4 foot storm surge. However, the whole watershed of St. John's had 10 to 20 inches. Yep. And thus that literally added another 2 feet, and that got us to a 5 to 6 foot surge. And thus, again, for those who weren't here, Irma was a much bigger deal on the St. Johns River than the beaches, whereas Matthew was a big deal, of course, on the beaches.
What would happen if we did get a big one again?
I think for anybody who was here in Matthew and Irma, as bad as it was, and to be clear, Matthew was really bad, especially for folks in St. John's and Flagler and along the Intercoastal. And Irma was really bad, especially for folks along the St. John's. Neither one of those were even close to direct hits. In fact, Lauren, I would say that yes, Dora was a direct hit, but it was not our worst case scenario. There were very few people that lived between St. Augustine and Jacksonville Beach. And yet the front right quadrant, which for 99.9% of hurricanes, that's the worst, the eye of Dora hit 6 miles north of St. Augustine. So although it may not happen for another 500 years, or it could happen this year, we don't know, I would say the worst case scenario is let's not even take it to the movies. Let's not even say Cat 5. Let's say it's a Cat 3/4, and it makes landfall on Ponte Vedra Beach, and it moves at 5 miles per hour and goes over Mandarin in northern St. Johns County, and we'd probably have a 12 to 14 foot storm surge, not a 6 like Irma. We'd probably have 10 to 20 inches of rain. Everybody from northern St. Johns County through Duval, northern Clay County, that's now probably 1.3 million people would experience winds of over one. I mean, I'm getting chills even talking about it. Gusts of over 100 miles per hour. So let's hope it doesn't happen. Let's prepare for it. But at the very least, whether you were back here in '64 with Dora or you were here with Matthew and Irma, we haven't had anything near the worst case scenario.
Determine your risk at the beginning of every hurricane season, or perhaps you're just new to hurricanes. Think about what your home is susceptible to. Remembering, wind and rain can be felt hundreds of miles inland. These hurricanes aren't just river or coastal situations. They can impact all of us. But for the easiest way to determine your risk, just download the First Coast News app, go to the Hurricane Central page. We've got everything you need to know right there.
Coming up,
Can you even think of a hurricane season where you were like, oh, this year's not going to be that bad?
when Hurricane Ready 2022 40 Years of Forecasting returns.
We are obviously at the Casa Marina. It's like
Yes.
iconic Jack's Beach spot.
Beautiful.
And they had a really cool story with Matthew where, you know, they have weddings here almost every weekend, especially during hurricane season, right? And this poor bride had a wedding the weekend, right, as Matthew is going by. But you know what I thought was really cool? It's not the fact that the wedding went on. It's just the fact that it takes a village, and the resiliency of our First Coast. They got this wedding on. They got power back at 1 p.m. on that Saturday.
Pretty amazing.
Bridges were closed.
And to be clear, they were responsible. They shut down. The Casa Marina got their people out of harm's way. But once the storm was gone, they probably wanted to get back to their own homes, but they came out here and love was brought together once again at the Casa Marina.
We talked about the big ones, and hopefully we never have one. But speaking of one that wasn't here, I remember being in the weather center as we were watching Hurricane Michael not too long ago hit the Panhandle. And I think you and I at one point just sat there and stared at radar with like our mouths dropped, not even saying a word, because it was worst case scenario for them. And it was like a textbook style Cat 5. As we're watching it roll on shore. So what is going through your mind, you know, when you're forecasting a big one?
Yeah, I remember again, we're talking about another place being hit, but I remember as that was happening, I mean, I really had to catch my breath. We all did. You could feel it in the air. And what I know is a nightmare about that is that it's not just the numbers. The numbers are bad enough. I mean, once you get to Cat 5, you're talking about sustained over 155 and winds to 200. You're talking about, even though Cat 5s tend to pull themselves together, you're talking about a 20-mile wide tornado that's as strong as any tornado we see hit like the Wizard of Oz, like Twister.
Right.
Only it's 20 miles. And you have a storm surge of 10 to 15, 20, 25 feet. As a reminder, for those new to the area, we're not talking about waves when we're talking about we're talking about the ocean. We're talking about the Intercoastal, the St. John's, and every creek that goes into it, they're rising 20 feet. But here's, to me, what really takes my breath away. And we saw it again. And even the world's best intensity forecaster. As you know, there's forecasters that do the track, where's it gonna go? And we're getting much better at that. But even the best intensity forecaster on Earth will say, you know where we haven't improved at all? It's with the rapid intensifiers. And you know what the rapid intensifiers are? The ones that become the Cat 5. And that's what Michael did. Yeah, we knew the potential was there, but it went from a category 1 or 2 to then a 5 in, what was it? 12 hours, maybe? I mean,
yeah.
And so therefore, those who didn't take it serious and evacuate because it wasn't a major hurricane, once, and this, we see it happen so many times with Cat 5s, that once it does happen, it's too late. You can't get out.
Right.
So I guess that's another reminder, is that until the day comes that we get better at forecasting Cat 5s, if you're being asked to evacuate, believe me, people aren't doing that just to say, well, let's cover everybody. Because they know that in evacuation, not only will it cause family stress, it probably will cause some injuries and maybe deaths in themselves. So it's not taken lightly. But that very often, that evacuation is occurring so that you're not stuck, and then suddenly here comes the Cat 5.
Yeah. Our environment now, a little bit different in a sense that we might have a La Nina period this year. In the past, I mean, we've talked about how you can get storms La Nina, El Nino, neutral. Warmer waters, less wind shear, all of the above. What would you say, you're looking at as far as those variables go this season?
So as a reminder, for those who are new to the area or you sort of get confused, for us, La Nina's bad.
Right.
Because La Nina is good for hurricanes.
Yes.
Less shear, more hurricanes.
Right.
El Nino is good for us because it's bad for hurricanes.
Right.
El Nino means
More
more
wind
shear.
shear.
So it's tough this year because even the world's experts, they're saying La Nina, but they're only giving us about a 53% chance. So it's almost a coin toss, right? And I think the point that you're getting to is, it is interesting, but I think really at some point, hopefully, science can take us to the next point. And whether science thinks it's going to be a La Nina or a El Nino year, or it's going to be an active or an inactive year, what really matters to us is how many of those will make landfall. We've seen active years, meaning there's a lot in the ocean, but very few come to land. We've seen inactive years where 1 or 2 come to land, Alicia, Andrew, Hugo, but that's a decade's worth of a catastrophic storm, right? So hopefully someday, it hasn't happened yet, someday that in those outlooks, then we can say, okay, but what does that mean for a particular area? We're not really there. So it's interesting, but so to me, we say now what we've said for 41 years, and that is that, why not prepare? Like, what if there's just one, but what if it just happens to hit you?
I mean, can you even think of a hurricane season where you were like, oh, this year's not gonna be that bad?
No.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because every year you never really know where they're gonna go.
You don't, and all it takes is one, yeah.
Develop an evacuation plan. Whether you live in an evacuation zone, figure that out, flood-prone area or mobile home, you need to have an idea of where you'd go, or if it would be safest to stay home and stay off the roads. And remember, you don't have to go hundreds of miles. You may just be able to stay with a friend, a family member in a more safe area. And always account for the pets. For all the evacuation zone information, the flood-prone areas, download the First Coast News app, go to the Hurricane Central page. We've got it all for you right there.
After the break,
It doesn't have to be a hurricane. It doesn't have to be like the movies to still be a major event.
Hurricane Ready 2022, 40 years of forecasting. We'll be right back.
So I think we touched on a lot. Is there anything else that we missed on the past? Because I know there's a lot.
I would like to talk about Faye.
Okay, yes.
Because I think Faye tends to not make the record books, but we learned a lot from Faye.
Okay.
So Faye was 2008, was never more than a strong tropical storm. And I know from experience at the station that because we do tend to because we have the experience of seeing so many major hurricanes around Jacksonville that even locally we tend to get lulled. And Tropical Storm Faye, even though it was never a major hurricane, but stayed as a strong tropical storm, came at us from the south. We had a long nor'easter. We had heavy rains. Does it sound familiar? It does now because of Irma.
Right.
But at 2008, we hadn't really had an experience like that prior to maybe Dora in its own way. And we had some of the worst flooding due to the combination of the surge that backed up the St. Johns River and rains. We had some of the worst flooding in urban Jacksonville and inland areas that we had had since '64. And it was, and as much as intellectually as forecasters, we were saying this could happen, I remember it was a great lesson for me that we almost have to remind folks more when it is just a tropical storm that it could be a really big deal. You know, it reminds me also that, so when it's not hurricane season, right?
Right.
And severe thunderstorm warnings are issued, as you know, and people take them pretty serious, and they should. But a severe thunderstorm only implies winds of 60 miles per hour. That's really not even a strong tropical storm. So just as a reminder, it doesn't have to be a hurricane. It doesn't have to be like the movies to still be a major event.
Right.
Now, I have a question for you. I have a question for you. Because I remember, so basically from 82 to 92. You know, initially I was single, then I was married, then I was a dad. And so I was beginning to shift somewhat how I viewed hurricanes.
Right.
But up until 92, I really thought, as a forecaster, I thought like everybody in Jacksonville did. And I think as a forecaster, you need to think about all the decisions people are having. In 1992 was the first time as a family we had a mortgage. And there was a hurricane heading toward us. And it wasn't even supposed to come toward us. But I remember, even as much as I thought I was thinking like everybody, I thought differently. So now that since Matthew and Irma, now you're a mother, and now you have a mortgage. I mean, right? Don't you sort of have a different perspective on things?
Oh, absolutely. I went from, forecasting and truly just, being the nerdy meteorologist thinking, wow, I get to forecast this. I've been wanting to do this my whole life. And then it kind of turned more serious. Like I've got my baby at home. I've got my dogs. I've got a house. Oh my gosh, our roof kind of needs fixing. Is that going to be okay? And in Irma, in fact, we needed a new roof after the storm. And so I remember, at one point too, Ryan's at home, hunkered down, like we like to say, with a couple of buddies and some dogs, and we had a tornado warning right over our neighborhood. But truly, it really does shift, I think. You care more about, not that I didn't care about the community, and I think you feel the same way too, but especially as you're here longer too.
I think that's why miles matter. I think that's why experience matters, and being in. And so that also takes me to, because here's another thing I remembered. How many times have I said, even in 1992, by then it had been 10 years, how many times had I said, folks, this may not even be the year, but be prepared. You can make better decisions if you do it at the beginning of the season as opposed to when there's a watch or a warning, because the adrenaline isn't flowing. And you know what? I heard my own voice. Suddenly, my house and my family was threatened, and all those decisions I could have made when the family was nice and calm, now we're suddenly making it when the wife is here, I'm here, the kids in daycare. So again, we say from experience, whatever you can do before there's a threat. And there's a lot of decisions you can make before the storm comes, so that when it does come, okay, honey, or whatever you call your loved one when you're stressed out. I'm called many things and not necessarily honey. Seriously, there's a checklist you can go through. And I know a lot of us now we have family in town, we have parents, we have grandparents.
Right.
And you talk about being a village, and I think if the larger part of that village, whatever you call it, sort of has a similar checklist, and then you can check each other. Because I think that because in Northeast Florida and Southeastern Georgia, because we have so many that aren't direct hits, but we worry, if you can take some of the worry out of it, whew.
Whether you're going to shelter in place or hit the road and evacuate, you got to have a disaster kit. I'm talking supplies, so non-perishable food items, water, medication, enough to last for you and your entire family, everybody in the house, for at least 3 days, because this isn't just a duration of the storm thing. This is aftermath as well. Think about power outages. So with that in mind, you need a full tank of gas, cash on hand, and ways to charge your devices, your cell phone. Maybe have a solar-powered radio or a crank radio and plenty of batteries for flashlights. It's a lot, I know. But if you download the First Coast News app, click on the Hurricane Central tab, boom, you've got it all right there. Stay safe.
You're watching the First Coast News special presentation from the First Coast's most accurate weather team, certified by WeatheRate. Hurricane Ready 2022, 40 years of forecasting. Sponsored by AC Designs, Heating and Air Conditioning, your home comfort experts. Rhino Shield, engineered to outlast paint. And by Universal Roof and Contracting, experience the difference.
You know, because we're on different shifts, we don't get to talk to each other much. When I came here in 1982, Good Morning Jacksonville had just started. We didn't have to work nearly as hard as you all do now. It was 6:30 to 7. And I remember literally the salespeople wondering if enough people were going to watch for it to make sense. In fact, one of the reasons I was hired, and this is serious, one of the reasons I was hired, they were trying to choose between me and an experienced meteorologist, because our station was going to have the first morning show. Some people don't realize that Good Morning Jacksonville was the first morning local show of any station. And it was pretty radical back then.
Start your day with more of a good thing.
Like more local news, sports, and weather.
More entertainment.
And the decision makers at our station were trying to decide, do we bring on an experienced meteorologist, or should we hire this young kid out of Texas A&M?
Hi, I'm Tim Deegan. Rain or shine, I'll have the weather forecast.
And I wasn't told this till later, but supposedly, you know, whoever the decision makers are, they said, you know what? No one's going to be watching the first 6 months anyhow, so we'll give Deegan a try. So I thank goodness for that, because it gave me at least 6 months, you know, to learn a few things. But of course, things were so different back then. We had something called Chiron, and Chiron, you had to type it in first, and then these letters would scroll across the bottom of the screen.
Okay.
We don't even have anything like it at the station now. So that meant, number one, as someone who took one semester of English at Texas A&M, and I specifically remember thinking, I'm not going to focus on this because I won't need English in meteorology, that I'm trying to write sentences, and then I had to technically learn how to work this Chiron thing. Well, that produced what's called a crawl. It's called a weather crawl.
Okay. I know where this is going.
And somewhat facetiously, but you could probably see my face when I was frustrated that I was spending more time trying to write an English sentence on this Chiron machine than I was forecasting the weather. So I thought, you know, gang, this would be a whole lot easier if, and so I proceeded to crawl across the studio floor, looking at the camera.
Hi, I'm Tim Deegan, and this is TV12's new weather crawl. If the sun does set tonight, we're going to see darkness increasing from the east and isolated lights giving way to widespread lights, some moving.
And to me, that made way more sense than having to, you know, go into Chiron. We didn't have what they call chroma key. And of course, anybody who's been to Disney knows what chroma key is now. You go up in front of a blank screen and
do whatever.
Do it whatever you want. When we first started, we drew on our maps and we would tape them. I mean, literally, we'd get these facsimile maps and these huge maps, and we had crayons, and we would draw in blue for where the water was. And I do remember, because I didn't have TV experience at Texas A&M, and I do remember thinking, oh my gosh, I got a degree and sweat bullets on differential equations, and I'm trying to decide which shade blue to color in the Gulf of Mexico.
Well, good thing that, you know, we've moved on from that.
Thank goodness.
We get to just click a couple buttons here and there,
Thank
right?
goodness, yes.
Now is a great time to go ahead and do an insurance checkup. Make sure you have enough insurance to cover damages to your home or outright replace it. You can call your insurance agent, ask them to do that checkup as well. Now remember, regular homeowners insurance and renters insurance does not cover flooding, so you're going to have that extra policy as well. Ask your agent about that. And most policies take at least 30 days to become active. So, act now. For all that information, download the First Coast News app, go to the Hurricane Central page. We've got it all for you right there.
Next.
You flew in one too, right?
Gilbert, and that was south of Cuba. We were actually in the eye, but we weren't too far from Havana.
Hurricane Ready 2022, 40 years of forecasting, will return after these messages.
We do have something though in our back pocket, presently. The technology, new satellites being launched, constant data that we are getting. It's a lot different than it was 41 years ago.
Well, it is way different, and that's why it is good to have you younger people. No, seriously, because meteorology is an inexact science. You learn to be humble. That, in other words, just because I see this is going to happen on a computer model doesn't mean it's going to happen. However, and this is why it's good to have the newer generation, because computer models have gotten better and we can trust them better. And you all trust them better. No, it really is good for me because sometimes it allows me to be more definitive than what my brain from 41 years ago wants to do. And just to give folks a reminder, although yes, weather forecasts need to improve, they will continue to improve. So we get it when people say, you guys can't even, is it gonna rain on the baseball game tonight? But here are some facts. And that is, and I know you know this, but I just like to say it out loud as we head into the season. These are the facts. Our 5-day forecast is now as accurate as a 24-hour used to be. That's a tremendous improvement. Now we have a 7-day cone, and the reason they go to a 7-day cone is because our 7-day forecast are now more accurate than our 3-day used to be.
I think one thing that at least is the easiest to really convey on television in a 2-minute weathercast is that the waters are warmer. And that, simply put, is more energy, more fuel to light those storms up and help sustain them across the ocean.
It is a great point, and it's a fact. And I remember when there was discussion about greenhouse gases and whether or not they were warming up the earth, and then there started to be some events. This is like in the early 90s, and I remember saying on the air, this theory looks like it's true, but we can't verify with any one particular storm. But we did say back in the early 90s, but if it starts adding up, it's going to be proof in the pudding. And we really have seen that heat is a measure of energy, and the more heat that's in the ocean, and it's not just on the surface, it's down to, as you know, 200 meters, there's just a lot of extra energy. And we can't say exactly how it's going to all come together, but chaos organizes, and it does. I think it was during...
When I was out in Dorian, is that what you're talking
Dorian,
about?
exactly, and you were there,
Yeah.
and that was one of the first ones, right?
My mother did not sleep a wink because I was in that storm as it turned to a Cat 5.
Okay, so now we're at the back of the plane where they are inserting an AXVT. It's basically measuring the water temperature with depth.
I do remember them launching those buoys and saying, oh my gosh, it's, 80 degrees, 15, 20 meters down deep.
Yeah, and I think in this day and age in which we all have Siri, everyone assumes that data is, but we used to not have that data, and that is huge data to have. Well, it's now only been a year or two where now they're putting drop signs and placing them where they think the hurricane's going to go, right? So we've had our first drop sign that was actually the eye went right over the drop sign. That's phenomenal.
You flew in one too, right?
Gilbert, and that was south of Cuba, and that's back when it gets tough now because we're going back to the Cold War. But as the Cold War occurred there, that we were actually in the eye, but we weren't too far from Havana.
The waves were so high, up to 60 feet. You can see them from 10,000 feet above. They were headed toward Cancun as we headed toward the core of Hurricane Gilbert. It's man against the elements, but this is one of the most powerful elements Mother Nature has created. These guys are walking around and they're getting, all that done. As you can see, it's really gotten rough here coming through this part of the eye wall.
There was concerns that maybe we were spies. And so as it turns out, and I think it was in a Russian plane, were in the eye with us. As severe as the hurricane was, the pilot had been just so professional. We had headphones on and you could hear over the noise. And anyhow, but by this point, as you know, when hurricanes rapidly intensify, the eye had constricted to maybe 5 miles diameter. Well, when those hurricane hunters are in there, normally a eye is more like 20 miles, it's calm. So not only are we getting great data, but it sort of allows the pilot and the crew to relax for a little bit before they go bam, back into the eye wall again. Well, he starts throwing out some expletive deletives. And I was curious, and I didn't find this out till later. But yeah, so not only were we now in the strongest hurricane ever recorded, and the eye was only 5 miles wide, so he didn't have much room or time to relax, he found out that the other guys were in there as well, but they wouldn't tell us where they were.
It's not much room for error in a 5 mile wide eye.
I hadn't thought about that for a while. So hopefully our researchers don't have to deal with that kind of stuff these days. But you know what? As we're doing this, it's tornado season. And as much as we don't want to experience hurricanes, you talk about hope. I would so much rather have a hurricane heading toward me than a tornado. I mean, even though science has improved with tornadoes, maybe you get 30 minutes to an hour that, it's actually coming here. Certainly people get more of a heads up days in advance. At least with the hurricane, like you said, because of science, because of technology, and it just keeps getting better every year, at least we know it's coming.
So what's the status of your home? Looking good, feeling strong? You got to make sure it's structurally sound and up to hurricane code. Do that. Find the weak points as well. Think about paneling or plywood to go over the windows, trim the trees, bring in all the loose things in the yard like those yard flamingos you may have. And remember, the weakest point of many homes, the garage door. For all that information, download the First Coast News app, go to the Hurricane Central page. We've got it all right there.
Past, present, but then the future. So looking ahead through the 2022 season, with what we know, what can we expect? Excluding all the numbers, because there are going to be a lot of numbers thrown out. And as we know, the numbers really don't matter, right? Because it can just take one. So what do you think we're going to expect?
So I think, like you said, as long as everybody realizes all it takes is one, I think the easiest thing to say is that, especially for anyone who's been here for 20 or 40 or 60 years, compared to what used to be average, it's going to be an active season, just because of the warmer oceans.
Every single year, it seems like it's above average. Right. We're breaking records, all of the above. So,
and hopefully that means it can be active for other people. For instance, last year was a terrible year for Louisiana.
Yep.
Wasn't too bad for Florida, especially not Northeast Florida.
And that gets back to the point where we're doing our job, we promise, but we really do want people to pay attention and be prepared and just kind of tune in and make sure they're educating themselves throughout the season.
Exactly. And what I like about our weather team is, yes, we take it very seriously, our responsibility to have you aware of the possibility of a threatening storm. But we also are there to help you enjoy life.
Right.
And as soon as we can, if we can say, so-and-so storm, yeah, it's out there, but you know what? We don't have to worry about it anymore. We'll be the first ones on the air to tell you that.
Maybe it'll bring you some good swell.
Exactly. So yeah, for sure. In other words, sometimes I think during hurricane season, some folks can get the, I hear no evil, see no evil. But don't think that just because we're coming on the air, for lack of vocabulary, getting on the digits, whatever we say these days, that just because you're about ready to hear from us, it doesn't mean it's bad news. In fact, because we live in an area where more often than not, they miss us than don't, I think more often than not during hurricane season, we're saying, hey, you know what? We have some good news today.
Right. I love that we got the chance to sit down because like you said, we're always opposite shifts and we're either overlapping by just a few minutes or, you know, we don't really get to see each other. And so being able to sit down and chat and pick your brain has been wonderful.
No, I really do appreciate. I really do mean it when I say one of the biggest compliments a person can give me is if they ask me a question. Oh my gosh, that's huge. And let's face it, whether this is a busy season or an inactive season, there'll be at least one storm where you and I will probably spend just enough time with each other to where then we'll be glad to
say goodbye.
Perfect.
It's because I love you, Tim.
Perfect. Bam, that was perfect.
Cut.
Yeah.
Well, now you're ready, right? You've got it all figured out. Why not go ahead and have that plan written down before a hurricane is on your doorstep? Know who issues those evacuation orders for your area. Have your supplies handy and where you would go if you do need to evacuate. And remember, have the documents handy. Those important things like your insurance papers, your will, things like that, right where you know where you can get them. Make it easy on yourself this hurricane season. And to make it easy as possible, download the First Coast News app, go to the Hurricane Central tab.
If you're new to the First Coast, welcome home. I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Tim just as much as I did. Now, for all you need to know all hurricane season long, pop on over to firstcoastnews.com where you'll find our Hurricane Central page, or you can take everything you need in the palm of your hand on that First Coast News app. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on Good Morning Jacksonville.
This has been a First Coast News special presentation from the First Coast's most accurate weather team, certified by WeatheRate. Hurricane Ready 2022, 40 years of forecasting. Sponsored by AC Designs, Heating and Air Conditioning, your home comfort experts. Rhino Shield, engineered to outlast paint. And by Universal Roof and Contracting, experience the difference.